conspiracy theories have been around for a long, long time, obviously, and they appeal to certain people across the political and cultural spectrum. They're conspiracies on, quote unquote, by both sides of sort of the American political divide. And they're always going to be out there. I'll tell you what worries me right now about what's happening with the Epstein files. What I suspect right now is, I believe, and this is, I'm hoping this doesn't come off like a conspiracy, but I believe that there are individuals who are named who know that bad things are coming out. I think they are actually attempting to create a conspiracy environment.
This is Dr. Andrew Rimby. Thanks for joining us here in the Ivory Tower Boiler Room. If you don't know, you can get all of our episodes ad-free on Patreon, patreon.com/Ivory Tower Boiler Room. All of Mary's true crime episodes ad-free, video episodes ad-free from the ITBR interviews. Also, follow us on Instagram, please, Ivory Tower Boiler Room. I like to put a lot of exciting arts and culture clips from the podcast, TV shows, films that we've discussed. TikTok is Dr. Andrew Rimby. Long story, the Ivory Tower Boiler Room one got taken off by TikTok because it was too salacious and scandalous, in my opinion. But I might be just having an Oscar Wilde complex there, thinking, that I was causing such a sensation on TikTok. So please rate us on Apple. It really, really helps. Review us. If you're on Spotify, you can rate us there too. YouTube, please follow our YouTube channel. Please like the video, share it with your friends, your community. The only way that I can keep giving you all free, exciting podcast episodes is because of the reach of the podcast. So rating us, reviewing us, it really, really does help. Also, shout out to Sean, our intern, who, if you see the cover art, you see the edits of the podcast, that's all Sean. So amazing work by Sean. So I hope you all enjoy this episode. Hi, everyone. It's Dr. Andrew Rimby. Welcome back to the Ivory Tower Boiler Room. I am so just honored, grateful, eager to talk with my guest today. So I'm joined with an author, legal expert, child protection and special victims advocate, public speaker, Roger Canaff. Wait, did I say your name right, Roger?
I say Canaff, but there's a whole arm of my family that says Canaff, so both are correct.
Okay, well, Roger Canaff, I'll say it correctly. His writing is influenced by his experiences as a child protection and anti-violence against women advocate, a legal expert, speaker. He's devoted his legal career to the eradication of violence against women and children, and his writing career is related to these topics, including his thriller novels, which the one I've been working my way through is called City Dark. So I'm so honored to have you here, Roger.
Thank you, Doctor. I appreciate you having me.
Thank you. Well, I appreciate the honorific. So first, I'm just curious, as a former special victims prosecutor, how did you kind of get into also becoming a novelist? Like, was this something you did as you were a prosecutor or kind of after your career as a prosecutor?
I actually started writing before, when I was an adolescent, which is not uncommon. It's sort of teenage angst, and I want to create something, and I'm grateful that I did. My career in prosecution refined my writing quite a bit. It provided a lot of research, a lot of context. That combined with maturity just sort of made the books hopefully better and certainly different. But that's basically how it was. I've been writing since I was pretty young, and I will continue to do that. But I like to think that my writing focused quite a bit once I got into this field, just because there were stories everywhere and quite a bit to work with.
Yeah, so I think it's so interesting that you use your expertise um, in the special victims, prosecution field, like even in City Dark, that it's about a prosecutor who confronts two murders, and he even like thinks that he may have committed them. So, what is it for you? Like, where do you find your material? Is it from like cases that you were part of? Like, are you taking from documentaries?
Yeah, very much so. Yeah, a lot of material comes from cases. uh, people that I knew in the system, fellow prosecutors, judges, defendants, witnesses, staff. It's all over the place. I mean, City Dark in particular it's actually, that character is based on a close friend of mine when I worked at uh, the Attorney General's office in New York State. He's a wonderful guy. He's not nearly as damaged as the character. The protagonist in City Dark, of course, is he's a late stage alcoholic who just has to confront a lot of demons, and yes, he has to confront blackouts, which make him wonder whether or not he was actually able to commit a horrible crime, which is sort of what drives the whole story of the book. And again, my friend John is not that person at all. But physically and in terms of the vast intellect and things like that, he was very much John. And so that's just an example. But yeah, almost all of my characters are crafted from people that I've just had the honor to work with or know.
Mm. So, I know when you approached me, there was a lot of conversation about just how artificial intelligence is really changing the game when it comes to the way that exploitation can happen now. I mean, I feel like there's so much we could get into, but
Mm-hmm.
to set the scene for the audience out here, like with the work that you've done, specifically trying to bring justice, or I mean, maybe I'll say amplify um, cases of sexual violence, abuse, specifically against women, children. Do you feel like what we're seeing now differs a lot from like cases that you were a part of?
Yes, there have been quite a few changes. I think the most stark is the ubiquitousness of video and now AI generation.
Mhm.
I should say generative AI is the better term. But yeah, that is the real kicker. The dynamics do not change. Predatory dynamics, the things that people do in order to identify relatively weak people when they're going to make decisions to harm them or exploit them physically or sexually, those things are ancient. That's just that, unfortunately, it's embedded in humanity, and those dynamics don't change. The power, the threats, the grooming process, all of those things are the same. The only thing that's different are the tools. But when the tools differ, everything does change, and the challenge to responders changes. So that is something that is happening or has happened that is quite different from what I remember when I was practicing.
So, are you talking kind of about technology right now? Like, what do they call them? Deep fakes or like fake
Yeah,
videos?
nudifying. Yeah,
Hmm.
there are nudifying apps. There are deepfake apps. Yeah, that is basically generative AI, or sometimes it's text to photograph. Stable diffusion is the term. Now, y'all, I'm a legal expert. I am not at all a technology expert at all, but I try to keep up with the tech as much as I can. But yes, it's those technologies that allow for images to either be generated out of whole cloth, or I think oftentimes more damagingly, they images to be altered. So, a Facebook photo of a young person, a school picture, a yearbook picture, pretty much any image or photograph you can imagine now can be manipulated to become pornographic, or to be or to be nudified, or to be somehow otherwise put in a compromising situation, for the exploitation of that person, to harm that person, to threaten that person, or to gratify the sexual urges of the creator. But it's all terrible.
Do you think that I remember like AOL chat rooms, or I was like of the generation where AOL chat rooms were popular in middle school. And then, like, eventually, I remember just the advent of Instagram and like just all of these apps starting. Do you feel like what AI poses is more or less nefarious than, like, say, the AOL chat room with predatory behavior?
I'd say it's worse, but again, the underlying dynamics are the same. So, the AOL, that example, the chat rooms that became big in the mid to late '90s, that technology allowed individuals to begin a grooming process most of the time. So it allowed a predatory person to go online and seek out individuals that they believe that they could exploit. Usually it was adults, mostly men, some women, but usually it was adults who were looking for or were looking to exploit underage individuals, right? Children. And of course, they would do that by either pretending to be young people themselves or simply by reaching out and saying, hey, I'm a lot older than you, but wow, you sound really grown up and you're really intelligent. I understand you're into this game or this song or this particular thing. Let's chat about it here. And then slowly, using those grooming tactics, break down that person's defenses, uh, get them past whatever natural, unfortunately, whatever natural biological instincts might occur or cultural instincts might occur to them to say, hey, this guy's bad, I shouldn't be talking to him. And unfortunately, if predators were successful in those kinds of chat rooms, and they were able to establish relationships, they were able to ask for photographs, and sometimes they were able to manage actual meetings and do hands-on abuse to these people. So that was the danger there. The danger now, again, it's identical in terms of the dynamics. You're still going to see grooming. You're still going to see, attempts at facilitating relationships, but AI that allows for, again, the most innocent of images can now be altered to create something that's pornographic that can be immediately victimizing. So even if and it can really be done to anyone, but I do think AI can still be a part. It will still be a part of the grooming process. There's no question. A person who is online and seeking to predate against children, he or she can they can use AI to create cool images, to entice kids with all sorts of things. Hey, don't you think this is funny? Don't you think this is edgy? What do you think of this? Unfortunately, it's a palette for them, to use to create all sorts of images, text, sounds, whatever, that can be used. But again, it'll be used in the same way that grooming has always been used, which is to slowly draw the child into, if it's a child, slowly draw the child into sexual activity, oftentimes before they even know that it's happening.
Well, first I should say, like, in your, expert opinion, like, what's the preferred term? Predator, pedophile? I mean, I feel like,
Predator is probably a good umbrella term. A pedophile technically, and actually, I think the original pronunciation was pedophile, but I just don't like it. Pedophile is what I use. I mean, per the DSM, right? Per the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Diseases and Disorders, pedophilia is sexual attraction to a prepubescent person,
mm,
period. Once a child reaches puberty, if they are no longer attractive to an individual, but they are attractive in that prepubescent time, then that person has pedophilia. He has that particular pathology. A sexual attraction limited to adolescence is sometimes called hebephilia, sometimes called epiphilia. It's again, it's a different pathology. It's still bad, but it's just different. So I tend to think pedophile a lot of times in our society is just overused. Pretty much anyone who is accused with sexual contact with someone under 18 oftentimes is labeled a pedophile. That's not necessarily the case. That's why I prefer predator, because sometimes people who seek to do predatory things against children, even young children, are not specifically pedophiles. Sometimes they are, sometimes they're just criminally diverse in other ways, or a child happens to be convenient. They would take an adult person as a sexual target or partner, but they can't find them, so this kid is there. So you get my point. Pedophile is just really specific. I think predator is sort of a better general term.
yeah. Well, so with, predators, like you said, it's almost that they all operate from this very similar playbook, but they're not all communicating with each other about this playbook. Like what have you learned about how they just really understand how to tap into, like, ensnaring their victims? Like how do they just figure out? It's almost like a cult leader who just knows
Mm-hmm.
how to become a magnetic person to attract these people.
Well, what I would say is, I work with some of the best people in the business when it comes to, individuals who study interpersonal violence and particularly sexual exploitation. And, one of them in particular, a woman named Nikki Valieri, is a PhD who I just adore for a lot of reasons. She's a great person. But she taught me years ago that many of these people, many of these predatory people, simply have instincts that allow them to know, to understand vulnerability, to understand that they're looking at a child who is marginalized too, and they tend to do it individually. Now, there is communication, of course. One of the I think one of the great I don't want to say failures, but one of the great challenges that the internet presented us as a society was the opportunity for predatory people to get together. So there became underground, and there still are, websites, chat rooms, things where pathologies can be. Well, this is how I feel. How do you feel? Well, what do you do when you see a kid? Well, this is what I do.
Yeah. Like the
So
dark web kind
yeah,
of activity.
the dark web. A lot of it's been pushed onto the dark web now, but even on standard internet, I mean, most internet providers, once they realize that kind of thing is going on, they seek to shut it down. But there are all sorts of ways. But even without that communication, I think for many predatory people, it is innate. And I'll give you a quick example, like Ghislaine Maxwell, or Ghislaine Maxwell, is believed to have been that kind of person. Now, again, I'm not putting her on trial. I'm not. Well, she's been on trial, but I'm as I understand it, both from reading trial transcripts and examining her case, and also from reading Virginia Giuffre's book in particular a few months ago, Ghislaine Maxwell was just adept at identifying girls that would make convenient victims for her and Epstein. She could walk into a room and she can tell you, okay, of the 15-year-old girls I'm seeing in here in this pageant, or in this working in this golf club, or in this restaurant, in this situation, her. And unfortunately, I think she was very, very good at that. And Jeffrey explains that. And I don't think it's uncommon. I think there are people who unfortunately just have tremendous instincts for weakness, and to look for people who will be unfortunately easier sort of marks, if that makes sense.
Yeah, well, I was rewatching that Netflix documentary. I mean, there's two now. There's the Jeffrey Epstein, and then there's the Ghislaine Maxwell one they just did. Filthy Rich, I think, is the documentary.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, like Nobody's Girl, the memoir that Roger's talking about, that Virginia, put out there posthumously, is out there. Because sadly, uh, she committed suicide. But like the way that she talks about it, even like in the documentary when Virginia's interviewed and she's like, well, I was at Mar-a-Lago, I was, handing out towels at the spa, and then Ghislaine walks in and just had this very like calm demeanor. She made you feel welcome, but she also like knew, like you said, Roger, she could pull out those who really needed things, like either money, right? They were dependent on, a job. They didn't have any family connections nearby.
Right.
Like, Ghislaine wasn't going for the women who, or the young women, the girls, right, who, had family connections or like power in the community, like those
Yeah,
who
exactly. Yeah.
would blow the whistle on the whole operation.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, a close friend the other day, who's not in this field, asked me, man, what was, do you know what the story was with a lot, like when these girls were on, whether it's Epstein's Island or in Epstein's home, where were their families? And I said, my honest opinion is, for a lot of these girls, and Jeffrey talks about that, for a lot of these girls, either there was no family, or the family was disinterested, abusive,
Hmm.
and they were kind of on their own. So if they were gone for days at a time, then there was either no one who cared, or that person was specifically trying to get away, because there was probably domestic, uh, um, you know, uh,
Yeah.
physical and sexual violence going on in the home. So there was a tremendous amount of that.
Yeah, and Virginia's story, I mean, is so heartbreaking in multiple ways. Like we even learned that her like estranged husband abused her, and like apparently if you have been abused as a child, there's a lot of likelihood that you experience domestic abuse when you're in a relationship. And
Yeah, sexual
yeah.
abuse too. I mean, it's one of the saddest things. It's one of the saddest things about understanding these dynamics. But people who have been, I'm always careful when I say this, because I never want to suggest that just because somebody was abused as a child, they're going to be abused as an adult. That's terrible. And it's not right. But it is true that individuals who suffer, particularly sexual abuse in childhood, are often more likely to experience it in adulthood. And here's why. It's because most kids who experience sexual abuse or exploitation either don't report it, or they certainly don't get the right kind of response. They don't get the proper therapeutic response. So they tend to grow into, they tend to grow up in an often wounded way. And the effects of accommodating that sexual violence becomes apparent to predatory people. They themselves almost never become predatory. Most kids who experience sexual abuse do not turn around themselves and abuse others. That's a myth, and it's very pernicious. That's almost never what happens. I mean, it can, but usually what happens is the individual who experiences sexual abuse goes into adulthood being much more aware of what's going on, and usually much more protective of the people around them. But at the same time, the effects of that sexual abuse often just, unfortunately, to predatory people, shine very brightly. Like, I can tell this person was abused. I can tell this person wasn't properly cared for. And that was the kind of thing I think that Maxwell and Epstein were both very good at. But in some ways, her in particular, because she was out there in the community looking for, basically people to bring home to him.
Yeah. Well, so with the current state of the Epstein files, are you surprised that these survivors still have not been given their justice, or even like all of the redacted files? Like, does this surprise you, Roger, that there's just such a fight to even name the abusers in these cases?
Are you a fan of classic Hollywood movies?
Are you a fan of queer cinema?
Then do we have the podcast for you.
Hello, everyone. I'm Christian Garcia.
And I'm Luke Del Mar.
And we are your hosts of That Old Gay Classic Cinema, where we take a look at some of the greatest films of all time and analyze them through a queer theoretical lens.
Let's be honest. LGBTQIA+ people have been a part of Hollywood since its inception, and this podcast celebrates those artists and entertainers of yesteryear while also taking a closer look at the queer-coded characters and stories in classic Hollywood films long before queer representation entered the mainstream.
So follow us down the road of classic cinema as we give you a guide to some of the films that touched our hearts, brains, and even gave us courage to be ourselves.
You can listen to That Old Gay Classic Cinema wherever you get your podcasts, and be sure to follow us on Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok.
All right, listeners, we're ready for our close-up.
Welcome to Severed, a podcast suite dropping new episodes every Monday. Severed True Crime and Severed Paranormal episodes deep dive into murder, mysteries, and the otherworldly in a concise format. A 7-minute story to frame the case with thoughtful analysis and our usual banter.
We sometimes find the lighter side of darker cases. We offer 3 spin-off shows, Severed Strange Stories, Severed Haunted You, and Severed Serial Killers that highlight the unusual to lighthearted topics from the digital dumpsters of true crime, haunted universities, and the minds of madness like Ted Bundy and Jeffrey Dahmer.
We are your co-hosts. I'm Harry Chambers.
And I'm Drew Hudson. Listen on all major podcast platforms, including Rogue Media Network and Radio Garden State. Follow us on Instagram at severed_podcast.
Oh no, not at all. If anything, I'm surprised that we are privy to as much as we are. I mean, yeah, Epstein is unique, I think, in the sense that there have long existed predatory groups, right? There have long existed webs of people who abuse children within it. We see it in different states. We see it across the world. We see it involving clergy. We see it involving not just religious leaders, but community leaders. Those things have always existed. I think Epstein's is different in that it seems to have involved literally the most powerful and influential people in the world. And that I believe is unprecedented. And because of that, because Epstein's ring didn't only involve wealthy men, or or men with some power, a local judge, or even a governor. No, the Epstein's ring involved people at the very, very highest level of financial and cultural and political power, and therefore it's going to be brutally difficult to bring anybody to justice, just because these men represent institutions that simply, they believe they're too big to fail. They can't, it's just unthinkable for them. And also, I think a lot of the men involved have reached levels of senses of entitlement and levels of narcissism and psychopathy, to where they're like, no way, I don't care what I did or what happened. This was never supposed to have happened, and I can get away with it. And I think we're going to see quite a bit more of that.
Mm. Well, so, how do you weigh in with the way that these files, they protect the abusers, but yet name the victims and survivors? And do you think that it is a re-traumatization? Like, some have said that this is re-traumatizing them.
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, as far as I know, from what I have seen so far, following this through the media, as everybody must, unless they're directly involved, I think I'm hoping that the exposure of victims and victims' names was inadvertent. And I think it was inadvertent just because I don't think the Department of Justice is handling this honestly or competently. That's my belief. I unfortunately, I don't think the Department of Justice is trying to do the right thing, and I don't think they're capable of doing the right thing. So as far as I know, a couple of weeks ago, there were quite a few survivors who came out and said, hey, listen, you all have been saying for months, okay, if we release these, we're going to release them. We're going to withhold the names of the victims. In fact, part of the reason that there was a delay, a months-long delay in getting these out here, is because we need to redact the victims' names. And what happens, all of a sudden, we see, as file dumps occur, we see the identity of victims often exposed, and the identity of alleged perpetrators, still blacked out. So I think this is a DOJ problem. I mean, to the extent that DOJ is controlling the policing of the scrubbing of and the distribution of these files, I think that's where the problem lies. But to answer your first question, it's absolutely re-traumatizing. Virginia Giuffre tragically died of suicide. She did so much for the world and for survivors and for this movement before she died, and it's heartbreaking. But she had the courage. But the point is, she made the choice. She made a choice to say, "I'm going to tell the world this is who I am. Nobody's girl." However you want to phrase it. I am willing to come forward and do this. And she discusses dozens of girls and women she knew that weren't ready to do that, and that's fine. Every survivor has every right to withhold their story, to withhold their account of events until they themselves, if and when, are ready to reveal it. And when it is stripped and revealed by the foremost federal, most powerful federal law enforcement agency, I think it's crazy making. It's outrageous.
Yeah. So, do you feel like the public, like the American public, it almost feels like we're also being pushed into conspiracy territory? I mean, has there always been, like, with these high profile cases, like a temptation to also, like, how do you, in your opinion, Roger, how do we make really conscious decisions and analyze the case in front of us without being like, well, everyone is lying to us, or, everyone covered this up? Like, how do you try to resist right? Some believe that Epstein is still alive. Like, I've seen, oh no, he's alive now, living on another island. Like, it's easy to try to fall prey to these conspiracies.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, conspiracy theories have been around for a long, long time, obviously, and they appeal to certain people across the political and cultural spectrum. They're conspiracies on, quote unquote, by both sides of sort of the American political divide. And they're always going to be out there. I'll tell you what worries me right now about what's happening with the Epstein files. What I suspect right now is, I believe, and this is, I'm hoping this doesn't come off like a conspiracy, but I believe that there are individuals who are named who know that bad things are coming out. I think they are actually attempting to create a conspiracy environment by saying, for instance, like things that become so unbelievable. I witnessed small children, being devoured, literally. I mean, again, I don't mean to be vulgar or shocking, but these kinds of allegations are out there that a certain president or a certain prime minister was actually dining on the intestines of children that had been disemboweled. I mean, things that are so shocking and so horrible.
Yeah.
I'm not saying those kind of things didn't happen or haven't happened in human history, but sometimes when either whether it's the media or whether it's targeted or whether it's being curated, if people are focusing on the absolute most shocking, most frankly incredible allegations, then it casts a patina of doubt over the whole thing. And I think there are a lot of relatively easily identified individuals in the Epstein files, frankly, men who we just know did bad things. We just know they did. I think those men somewhat are depending on some of this incredibly salacious stuff to make the average American just kind of, or any citizen, who's following this in the world, just kind of roll their eyes and say, you know what? Obviously he was bad and a lot of bad things were done, but I can't believe this, this one particular thing was happening. We were not aware of these kids being, you know what I mean? I that to me is worrisome, because to be brutally honest here, if I knew that I were one of these men, if I were in this group of credibly accused men who had done terrible things, it's the kind of strategy that I would encourage. I would say, hey, man, we need to dilute the blame. We need to, let's bring in somebody, who's been dead for 50 years. Let's bring in somebody who was beloved and respected, and let's claim that he was there and that he was doing, you know what I mean? So I think that's a potential strategy. I'm not saying it's going on across the board, but it worries me. See, the super salacious stuff that's coming out, I think, can be distracting, and I think it can be distracting for a purpose.
Yeah. Well, so, what do you think about the, I know, again, I'll say allegedly just because in case, but I know with emails, like it's been pretty strongly suggested or even shown that, Trump, there's something going on with a 13-year-old. Or I know that there's been a lot of back and forth about, clearly establishing a relationship and showing that, him and many other of these men, have been with underage girls. And like something that just boggles my mind, Roger, is like the collapsing of like calling them women when they're girls, like they're underage and children. Like, do you feel like there's also kind of a way to try to make it okay that these men were with underage girls by using language that tries to show them in a mature light?
Absolutely. And you're seeing it. It's beginning to present itself on various social media platforms. And I applaud the people that are bringing it out. You'll see clips, some that are very recent, frankly current. I know there was a guy who appeared on Joe Rogan. It wasn't Rogan, but it was a guy that was on his show who was saying exactly that. Hey, let's not get carried away. There's little evidence that these were little girls. It's more that they were, on the young side. Yeah. So whenever somebody uses on the young side or fully physically developed, or those are basic. Yeah, those are code words, and those are attempts at manipulation. Absolutely, that's absolutely what they are. The bottom line is, if an individual is too young, she is unable to consent. Yeah, and another thing this Rogan guest said, not Rogan, this guy was saying was, hey, and some of the wealthy and powerful men that were involved here are from countries where those norms don't exist, where you're not limited by the age of 18 or 17 or so. So there are all sorts of people out there who are willing to make excuses and to suggest that sexual relationships, to use their language, not mine, but some sort of sexual contact between an adult and a child can still be, if not strictly legal in the United States, that it can be not immoral, and that it in fact can be appropriate. I would never say that. I vehemently disagree with it. But yeah, there are quite a bit of voices who are going that or taking that tack right now also. So we're seeing it on both sides, right? We're seeing on one hand, I do believe we're seeing a lot of apologists who are coming out and saying, hey, listen, these girls looked, acted, and sounded and spent money as if they were blah, 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 blah. We're seeing that on one hand. On the other hand, we're hearing stories about literally infants who were murdered and thrown off the sides of yachts and things like that, but not before people were physically consuming them. So on both sides of this, we're getting manipulating, distracting language. And it's dangerous. It's hard to stay, it's sort of hard to stay in the middle of the road and keep going with that. And the only thing we can do is absorb the information, catalog it, and hold our leaders to the fire. Whether it's the Department of Justice at this point, that's, the United States Department of Justice is the entity that generally controls this.
Yeah, well, so the following people I'm going to name, I'll preface this by saying, I know that they're high profile people, but also, yes, like they should have their day in court, which I'm sure you agree that they should,
of course,
have to stand trial. But, Trump, Alan Dershowitz, Prince Andrew, Bill Clinton, these are all just men who've been named multiple times. Not saying that they all did the same acts, but how about the elite people? Or the elite men, I'll say men because like the group I'm naming are men, but of course, Ghislaine Maxwell, which I want to get into the gender of it after, which is where are the elite men? Have you seen any form like brotherhood to try to expose? Like, I'm not really seeing a lot of the elite men, trying to take down those who have committed these crimes. Now that the spring semester is here, I am so excited to let you all know about a publisher, an independent publisher that's celebrating 40 years of great books called Broadview Press. I love Broadview Press. I have so many of their editions of classic literature like Wuthering Heights, which is coming out soon, and it's our book club choice. And they have so many academic books for instructors and for students and the general public. So I've had so many exciting guests on, from guests talking about The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, guests talking about vampire literature, horror literature. I'm looking at you, Jeffrey Andrew Weinstock, whose book actually just came out called Horror Theory. Look it up. And I cannot wait because I have two exciting guests coming on soon. And I've recorded their episode, so I know that it's going to be such an interesting conversation. The first is Rachel Tucholsky, who wrote a book called Writing on Fire, a fierce yet friendly guide to writing humanities essays in college. I've used excerpts of it for my Writing 2 course at Montclair. It has gone over so well. I just love what Rachel does. And we get into this in our episode about this metaphor about writing on fire, like how that's a great way to think about free-flowing, brainstorming, creative ideas, and getting into that flow state, which, as Rachel explains, happens not just in writing, but in many other avenues. And then the other guest that I have on is David Starkey, who wrote a book called Academic Writing Now, A Brief Guide for Busy Students. It is designed to cover the basics of a college writing course in a concise, student-friendly format. Each chapter concentrates on a crucial element of composing an academic essay and is capable of being read in a single sitting, which, for a generation, myself included, I think all of us now, just consumed by digital media or just this attention grabbing technology, reading in a single sitting is definitely a plus. So head to Broadview Press, use the promo code Ivory Tower, and you'll get 20% off every single book in their collection. There's also a really cool digital library collection they have. So if you're a librarian, take a look at that. Message me. If you're a librarian, I'd be happy to show you what that new collection looks like. And I hope you all enjoy your reading. The spring season is here, which means there's a new issue of the Gay and Lesbian Review called Victorian Times, all about my favorite period of literature, the 19th century. And you'll see a rugged Walt Whitman on the cover and the dandy Oscar Wilde. Well, guess what? My first article is now published in the Gay and Lesbian Review called Once Upon a Time in Camden. It's the intro to my book, which looks into their queer literary relationship, but also Whitman and Wilde's homoerotic poetics, and specifically what Whitman does with male same-sex desire before the category of homosexuality even existed. Like, how did he even express this in his poetry? Well, you'll have to read my book to find out. Book coming soon. If you know of a publisher, let me know. I'm shopping around right now. But this Victorian issue is so special with the Gay and Lesbian Review. There's articles on Dr. Jekyll and Victor Frankenstein. I'm about to see The Bride, which I can't wait to see. And right, Guillermo del Toro's new Frankenstein is all the rage. There's an article on Monte Cristo's Women in Love, Tchaikovsky's Men. I love Tchaikovsky's ballet. I'm particularly an admirer of The Sleeping Beauty. One on Captain Cobb. There's film and TV shows reviewed like Heated Rivalry, Boots, Kiss of the Spider Woman, which, if you don't know, I had an episode with Jeremy Fox from the Gay and Lesbian Review, the managing editor, and Colin Carmen and Joseph Federico, and we talked all about Heated Rivalry. You have to listen to it. And Kiss of the Spider Woman, I keep recommending to everyone. It is an astounding film. Boots, I actually had the creator Greg Cope White on the podcast too. You'll have to listen to his interview. Also, if you haven't heard our episode on the kink issue of the magazine, it's really, really interesting. And the ethnography one. And yes, there will be an episode soon about the Victorian issue. So get your hands on the Gay and Lesbian Review. The digital subscription is really easy to get, glreview.org. The print subscription also, head on over to the website, click subscribe, use the promo code ITBR choice. You get a free issue of the magazine. Choose the Victorian issue, will you? So head to their Instagram, their TikTok. I love the Gay and Lesbian Review. I get so many book recommendations, TV show, film recommendations. One of the films that I can't wait to watch is in this issue. I want to say it's pronounced Pillion or Pillion. I think I made it French there, with Alexander Skarsgård. So enjoy your reading, everyone. And if you're reading the Gay and Lesbian Review, please reach out to me. I want to let them know, that you all listening to this podcast are reading their magazine.
I have not seen that either. I'm not saying it's not out there. I'm just saying that I have my finger on the pulse as much as I can. Of course, within the context of my daily life and the things I enjoy and have to do. I also follow this story quite a bit. I look on different platforms, different news sources. I haven't really seen that. I mean, I've heard individuals who have come forward and said, we need to strip this down. We need to find out what happened. Rich and powerful individuals, but I can't think of, I'm not saying it's not out there, but I can't think of what you're suggesting. I haven't heard that. Is there a group of super wealthy or politically connected men in particular who have come forward and said, hey, we need to get to the bottom of this. We need to clean our own ranks. No, I haven't seen that.
Yeah. Well, what do you think is going to happen with Bill Clinton testifying? Like, do you think that the tide is turning? I mean, some are even suggesting that he's throwing himself into the fire to try to have justice happen. I'm not sure if that's what the case is, but
yeah, I'm not either. I mean, look, I can see this from both sides. I think the effort to try and bring Bill Clinton before a Republican-controlled Congress had political aspects that don't have a lot to do with really seeking justice here. So I think, and the Clinton camp says the same thing. Listen, we're being dragged into this for political reasons, for smear reasons. However, I also think at the end of the day, a person who is aware of something that was happening in Epstein's orbit does have a duty to come forward and talk about it, whether that person is a sitting president, an ex-president, or whatever. So at the end of the day, I I favor the fact that Clinton will testify. And again, I have absolutely no idea what he would say. I wouldn't suggest anything about him or any other person unless I had evidence that made me confident to say something like that. If Clinton comes forward and says, you know what, I saw a lot of really, really terrible things, and I realize now, or I have been consumed with this for a while, and I realize that not reacting to it, et cetera, or putting up with it, or if he does do something like that, and he potentially exposes himself, his legacy exposes himself to criminal liability, even if he does that for a greater purpose, then good on him. And I would say that about anybody, Republican, Democrat, or otherwise, who was willing to come forward and say, you know what, I've got to be honest. These are the things I saw. These are the things, and I knew they were wrong, and I should have done something. That, of course, is different from I did X, Y, and Z, and I feel terrible. Well, that's another level of confession. I don't know what we're going to get, but anybody who is willing to tell the truth at the expense of themselves, I give them, even as predators or as people who were in that environment and indifferent to it, I will give credit where credit is due if that moves the ball forward.
Yeah. So it seems like, I mean, the American public has always had, I feel like when it comes to child sex abuse and, even, rape cases. I mean, I'm thinking even Rose McGowan, like all the, backlash she got for being so outspoken about Harvey Weinstein. Like, what do you think it means now, Roger, that the American public is basically litigating the Epstein files? Like, can the voice of the American public overthrow the elite culture of predator protectors?
It'll be really tough. The short answer is yes. I absolutely think that enough of a groundswell, enough public anger and outrage, I do think that will make a difference. It sort of creeps upward in terms of putting pressure on institutions. When I lecture about sexual abuse and exploitation, I talk about institutions all the time, right? Institutions are designed usually, almost always, for a benevolent purpose, but they're very much concerned with self-protection. So whether it's the National Football League or the Roman Catholic Church or a particular school or a parliament or whatever, the institution protects itself as much as it can. And I think there are multiple and extremely powerful institutions that are at play here. So in addition to the individuals, in addition to extremely powerful men who are saying, okay, whatever that part of my life was, I don't want to have to pay for it. I don't want to be exposed for it. They're going to be pushing back and using every resource they have with regard to the media, with regard to money, with regard to distraction and obfuscation and disinformation. They're going to use those things. But in addition to that, some of the institutions that are involved, Harvard University is implicated because, or Duke University, or several educational institutions who had ties to Epstein because of his philanthropy and other things. So it's going to be tough, but I do think we're seeing. I don't know if I'd call it a tipping point, but we are definitely seeing a groundswell of outrage that it may very well change things. I'm not sure to what extent, but I am, and I think the same thing happened in the Me Too movement. You mentioned Harvey Weinstein. That was before Epstein became a household word, I think, for the most part, although it was still well known then. But yeah, I mean, the Me Too outrage changed things. I really, really think it did. I think there were thousands, if not millions, of women who were willing to come forward. They not necessarily involved in Hollywood or things of that nature, but I think there were many, many, many people who came forward who never had before and said, I was manipulated and abused and exploited in exactly this way, and I am mad. I am angry, and I want to be heard. And I do think it made a difference. I think it made a difference for us culturally and politically. And I think this will also. I just hope that, I hope it moves things in the right direction, and I hope it's successful.
So there are definitely realities of the whistleblowers and the backlash that they receive. Like you said, there's a lot of power, especially with, Harvey Weinstein, but even I would say even more so with what's going on with those named in the Epstein files. But like Rose McGowan, they tried to, if I remember right, was it like Mossad or I don't know, there were secret agents who were hired to pressure her, or if I remember clearly, someone was like
Hmm.
sent in to befriend her. And like it was hired by Harvey Weinstein, like to spy on her. And
Yeah, it's not that particular allegation I had not heard. I can tell you it's not uncommon for wealthy people, mostly men, but it's not uncommon for wealthy people when they're backed into a corner legally to use all sorts of tact. You know, Woody Allen, when he was accused, and and there was a legal procedure that followed it, was in his defense team employed tactics against everybody involved in the case, the judge, the detectives, it's unfortunate, but I think that is very common when, the more wealthy and powerful the target is in terms, and when I say target, I mean a legal or a criminal target, then the more desperate they become and the more power they have, the more they're willing to use anything at their disposal in order to silence victims and witnesses.
well, how interesting because Woody Allen's son, Ronan Farrow, was actually the one who was the biggest whistleblower, like bringing forth Rose McGowan and other um, survivors of Harvey Weinstein's abuse, if
Hmm.
I
Yes.
remember. And I'm sure, I think Ronan Farrow also talked about the like how that put him so out there that he was facing threats. I mean, is that common? I'm assuming even the survivors of Jeffrey Epstein, like they talk about the intimidation tactics that are
Hmm.
used.
Yeah, that's common. The more wealthy and powerful the potential defendant is, the more common it is to see that kind of, it's common sense. The more common it is to see that kind of those kinds of tactics. So with people who are potentially wrapped up in Epstein, I definitely think we're going to see that. We're going to see it more and more.
Hmm. Do you think do you think there's a reason why there's a lack of like, when I was looking at documentaries, like there's been nothing done recently. Everything is from 2020, 2022. Like, does who's currently our president have anything to do with what's going to get out there in the media, like on a big um platform? Like, do you think that Netflix, Peacock, are these companies nervous to put out something about
Yes,
Epstein?
I think they are. I mean, I wouldn't say that about any individual company without doing a lot more research, but I would say in general there are absolutely media outlets that are still very, very, very concerned about crossing a person like Trump, about crossing the sitting president. And again, I know what everybody else knows. I don't claim any sort of special insider knowledge, but I think it's apparent that there are media companies and entertainment companies that have expressed, well, I should say, they have acted in ways where it's apparent that they are trying to curry favor and avoid vindictive action from this administration. And there's a lot of money at stake. I mean, AI has ushered in a whole, just a massive, massive new type and style and genre of media power that needs to be wielded. And in terms, or to the extent that the government picks winners and losers for contracts, for access to things like that, then absolutely those media companies, whether it's Amazon or the Meta platforms or Grok or Musk's thing, yeah, many of them I think are concerned with whether or not they find the president to be personally good or bad, whether or not uh, they think that he's palatable in other ways or a good guy in other ways, doesn't really matter. I think they feel this responsibility to promote, or whatever the desire is, to promote their brand at almost all costs. So yeah, I absolutely think that's something that we're seeing.
Yeah. Well, I was reading more about Peter Thiel and Palantir, which I'm sure you know about,
Yeah, I know both of them. Yeah.
and was very dismayed. I mean, dismayed is like a light word, but just the way that ChatGPT, like I was reading that, like there's now links that ChatGPT is, and I don't think this is a surprise because people have been speculating about this, but like has links now to, helping ICE agents or being connected to like helping with the police surveillance system, like creating even more of a
Sure.
surveillance system. Like, does this surprise you that AI would be used for these purposes?
No, not at all. And there are two things in this for the companies that are cooperating with ICE or that are cooperating with the administration's current uh, position on immigration and things like that. To the extent that those companies are doing it, there are two reasons they're doing it. One, money. They're making millions, if not billions of dollars in contracts. And two, they're currying favor with the administration, and they are putting themselves in the position to receive even more additional uh, favors, access, and just preferred treatment. And I think that's why this is being done. And I think the extent to which these leaders, whether it's Teal or Alex Karp, I think, who was CEO of Palantir, the extent to which they are willing to discuss this or to acknowledge it differs. I mean, I think there are some who are like, look, somebody's going to get this contract. It's the law. It's not like I'm doing something illegal. It's similar to how people reacted to tobacco 45 years ago. Hey, this is a legal product, for crying out loud. You may not like it, but I think there's that. I think there are other people who are simply like, you better believe I'm going to do this, and I don't care what anybody thinks. So it runs the gamut. But at the end of the day, they're doing it. One, they're doing to get paid by the American taxpayers are footing the bill for this, and two, they're hoping to be in the position to receive preferential treatment as the government, to the extent that it can, as the government begins to pick winners and losers in the battle for for who controls some of these platforms and our access to them going forward.
Yeah, well, and something that, you know, frightens me and so many others is like, what do you think is happening, Roger, with, this data that people give to ChatGPT to, I mean, our cell phones data
Yeah.
is being sold on social media platforms. Like, is there any correlation between that and like the sexual exploitation you specialize in? Like, can someone's private data be used for predatory purposes?
I'm sure it can. I would never speak on how, because again, I'd have to be inside these companies and I'd have to be more of a tech expert, and I'm not either of those things. So, but I think the short answer is absolutely. Data gathering has been a big problem in the internet age for a really, really long time. And it wasn't until relatively recently that consumers even woke up to it at all. Like, why do, oh, this is great. I have loyalty points when I go to this certain pharmacy. Well, yeah, in exchange for providing them with information on every single thing you buy. Facebook is free and it always will be. Yes, because Facebook mines tremendous amounts of data from its users, and you're not getting paid for any of that. Now, again, and we've seen laws and we've seen voluntary steps that companies have taken to say we won't sell your data. But I guess the short answer is absolutely there is an additional layer of vulnerability that happens there. If information about consumers gets into the wrong hands, here are 14 million 13-year-old girls who downloaded information about Taylor Swift last week, and this is who they are, and this is where they are, and this is how best to reach them. Of course, that can be used for exploitive purposes.
So take a show like To Catch a Predator, because I'm sure that was the show that, like, when you were special victims prosecutor, it's like the most recognizable in America.
Yeah, I remember it. Sure.
Do you feel like that show, did it help the American people understand what it means for grooming and predatory behavior to happen to underage children? Or did it kind of just create this, oh, this is what a predator is like, and they're going to face legal consequences and be captured?
I mean, I think the net effect of it was positive. I didn't watch a whole lot of it. I never had anything against it. My fear with it was, of course, it would just be dressed up. It would become an entertainment vehicle, which of course it was. But the ones that I saw, this is what we did. This is what we know about this person. This is what happened when the cameras came in, and this is what he said. But, I think the net effect of it was positive. I think most people saw that. And I think some of what was valuable about a show like that was it demonstrated that very, very normal looking people, mostly men, some women, mostly men, normal looking men engage in this behavior, normal looking and acting men, and men who have families and jobs. They were able to see that there isn't a face of a predator. It isn't somebody creepy or somebody who always looks different from you. Or, I think that was positive. And I also think, and who knows, hopefully that had a chilling effect. I mean, hopefully there were guys out there that were all set to go and do things like that and became frightened that, understandably and good, that they could end up in something like this. So again, I think the show had a net positive.
Yeah. So why do you think the American legal system, I mean, this is going to be a big question, but however you want to interpret it, but why do you think the American legal system has had such a problem, an issue with actually prosecuting predators, like child predators, for example, like them actually facing justice? Is it because it's really hard to find them? Is it because it's hard to have like the court take up the case? Is it because there's so much like uh sowing doubt in these cases? Like it just seems like America as a country like just has such an issue believing survivors at all. Like
Yeah, no, it does. It does. And everything that you mentioned is the case. We start with the fact that the numbers are the conservative numbers, meaning the what we can be really, really confident on and don't think that we're overstepping on. The conservative numbers are about 1 in 3 girls experiencing child sexual abuse and about 1 in 6 boys. Wow. So this happens a tremendous amount. So you begin with the sheer numbers, but then pair that up with the percentage of kids that actually report, and that was almost nothing until very recently. Most kids just fold. Most kids who experience sexual abuse fold it into their lives and they move on until such time as that perpetrator leaves their life or they age out or whatever. So most kids didn't report it at all. The very few kids that did report it over the last 50 or 60 years were met, certainly prior to about 20 years ago, maybe 30 years ago, they were met with disbelief. They were met with anger. Go back to sleep. Your uncle does that to everybody. Don't complain. Don't embarrass the family. How dare you say that about my boyfriend or your father? The very small percentage of kids did report were almost always met at the very beginning, before police or prosecutors or courts even got involved. They were met at the very beginning by, unfortunately, a tragic response, usually from what we call a non-offending caregiver. So mom or grandma or another male or something like that, a cousin or a dad, whatever, a non-offending person who means well, but doesn't understand, usually means well, but doesn't understand the dynamics and either denies or insists that nothing can be done, or that's the way it is in this family or in this culture, in this religion, you just need to deal with it. So there's so much that threatens a case even before. And then for the few cases that finally did get to response agencies, police and prosecution, the cases are very difficult to prove. They usually leave no physical evidence. The report is usually delayed. So it's very, very seldom is a person caught in the act. Very seldom does a child jump up and, mommy, somebody just touched me and he's upstairs. They're almost never stranger cases, right? They're vast majority of the time the perpetrator is known to the victim, has engaged in a grooming process. So every single one of these dynamics makes the case difficult to even see, a legal response, let alone end up in a courtroom and end up in a prosecution. We've gotten better. I mean, there are quite a few things that we do better just from educating society on the realities of it, which again, I think to an extent, To Catch a Predator and, just all sorts of pop culture things that have been out there that frankly have done a decent job at saying, let's get rid of the stigma. Let's stop blaming children who come forward. We are getting better. We get better every year. I like to think I've been a little bit of a part of that, over the course of the time that I've been working in this, but we still have a long way to go. But the best answer to your question is, and you named a lot of them. All of those dynamics make it difficult. Yeah, and there's also, finally, I would say that, let's say something gets all the way through, it gets past all those boundaries, and now it's in front of a jury, right? A jury of Americans in many communities. Again, this is all improving, but I think there were many cases where, particularly if the perpetrator looks like them, he doesn't look creepy. He's respected in the community. He appears to be a decent guy. He's got a skillful defense that maybe portrays the child as a liar or not particularly. Now you've got a jury weighing this and saying, this is going to, if we find this guy guilty, we're going to destroy his life. He's going to be abused and physically and sexually abused in prison. He's going to be completely defrocked of whatever it is that he does professionally. So, and also I think there was a tendency on behalf of juries to say, I just don't believe that this happened. I think it's a horrible story. I'm not sure why it was concocted, but I can't bring myself, so that reluctance to convict is, that's kind of the last thing, but all of those things together make it remarkably difficult.
Yeah. Is it okay if we go for 10 more minutes, Roger?
I'm fine. Sure. Whatever.
You're good?
Whatever.
Okay.
Yeah, and I know you're going to edit it, and that's great. So whatever. I'll try to be concise, but
no, this is, thank you for being so open with this conversation. So, okay. Ghislaine Maxwell, with everything like you've brought up or things that, Virginia brings up in her memoir, the documentaries, it's all about her posh upbringing, the Maxwell family being from like a newspaper company, just having a lot of means, and like her connections that she brings credibility to even Jeffrey Epstein in his place in society. It's not just Ghislaine Maxwell, but the women who, even with Harvey Weinstein, knew what he was doing and led these women into his room. Like, it happens with Weinstein, it happens with Jeffrey Epstein, I'm sure it happens with many other predators. Why do women stand by these abusers and even participate in it? Like, you would think that, right? I think the general public thinks, oh, women would be always against a predator, but sometimes, they're ensnared in this web. Like, is this something you saw in your time as a prosecutor? Is that women do sometimes, fulfill this role because it like leads to the facade that they're someone who can be nurturing and comforting?
Yeah, I would never. I wouldn't make a blanket statement about women's agency or how they act and things of that nature. I will say that yes, it is not uncommon to see a person who may not. I think Jelena was a hands-on offender herself, but it's not uncommon to see, particularly when you're talking about really, really powerful people, it's not uncommon to see bystanders, male and female. But I see what you're saying. It's like, okay, but wouldn't a woman more naturally feel? Wouldn't she feel protective? She has experienced the same dynamics. She's probably experienced the same threats. And I think it all comes down to the individual. I think there are some individuals who say, well, there's something in it for me. I don't want to get hurt further. I am being very, very well cared for in this situation, so I'm going to turn my head, and I don't care what happens behind the door. There are some people who are worse than that, of course, and are just saying, I just don't care. This is benefiting me, and that's all there is to it. I think for most people who in that circumstance, and women included, I think a lot of them feel somewhat helpless. I think a lot of them feel as if the situation has been normalized because guys like Epstein seek to normalize it. Jeffrey talks about that in her book. One of the things that she was, again, I wish she wouldn't blame herself, but certainly in the book, she accepts responsibility. But she says, I was used in recruiting. I was out there after it had happened to me. I was sent out into the community to look for girls who were like me and bring them back. I hate myself for having done it. I wish I hadn't done it, but it became a part of my life. And there's a bit of a a bit of a Stockholm syndrome there. I think I'm not saying that happened with Jeffrey. I don't really know, but I think with some people, they become ensnared and they become a part of the life of this really wealthy and powerful person, and it just becomes their life. You know, their life becomes inviting girls in, saying hi to them, giving them money after they emerge from whatever room they're in, you know. And I think for a lot of people, it just becomes, and, you know, heck of a lot of men that were involved in this too, right? Guys who were driving these girls back and forth and, you know, and right. And providing security and waiting outside of the door and standing out there. So, yeah, but it's a fair point to say it just seems strange to me that, you know, that of the two genders that you know, wouldn't women be more attuned to this? And I think they often are, but I do think that sort of sense of entrapment sometimes takes over, or that belief that, well, there's nothing I can do about this, and right now I'm not being harmed, so, you know, I'm going to just sort of not push this and let. And again, imagine how terrified. I mean, you've been around. Let's say you're a Jeffrey or another woman who's been around Epstein and has seen how much power and has seen who he hobnobs with. You know, I mean, how much, you know, how likely is that person going to say, you know what, I don't care. I don't care if such and such prime minister is here. I'm going to, your president or multi-billionaire, I'm gonna walk outside right now and flag down a cop. You know, it's not gonna happen. And the deeper it goes, the more. And remember, the final thing I'll say about it, the more they themselves do become complicit, then the more they believe, and the predators absolutely reinforce this, the more they believe that if there is a whistle blown, that they'll be caught up in it also as criminal defendants. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. At some point, the ringleaders, the Maxwells or the Epsteins themselves say, "Hey, listen." And by the way, this happens in everyday child sex abuse cases too. A young child who's groomed by a father or an uncle or a mom's boyfriend. You know, if the child is groomed skillfully enough, at some point, that predatory person can look at the child and say, "Who are you going to tell?" Because keep this in mind: when you do tell, you're going to be blamed as much as I am. You were as bad as I was. And that's even more powerful if the child is an adolescent.
Yeah, sadly, a childhood friend of mine, her father sexually abused her, and her mom actually stood by the father, I mean, her husband, and like, it wasn't until the police got involved and the father was found to have child pornography that then he was arrested. And then the mom finally was like, I was so wrong. And it's just like to live with that, to know that your mom actually enabled and stayed with this abuser. You know, I'm sure you saw that, unfortunately. Like you said, it's almost like when someone knows what's going on and they like just cover their eyes.
Yeah, I saw that dozens, maybe hundreds of times. And generally the people that were doing it were not evil people. They weren't, you know, there were stories. There absolutely are stories of non-offending, well, I can't call them non-offending. There are stories out there of one parent, often a mom, who actually provides access, sometimes explicitly for money, sometimes sometimes tacitly, like, I'm going to get favors for this. I have a feeling I know what's happening with him and my 5-year-old, but again, I'm protected. I'm not being beaten. You know, we do see that, but we saw more often were otherwise decent people, usually women, who were paired up with a male predator, and it was just almost impossible for them to believe. You know, and that disbelief and that horror, those are very, very difficult things to get over. And sometimes the easiest thing is to say, no, there's no way I made that mistake. There's no way I married a man, walked down the aisle with him, shared a bed with him for 28 years, and he is, you know, doing this to our child. I can't believe that about myself or about him, and therefore I'm going to deny it. And that's absolutely tragic, but it's very, very common.
Yeah. Well, I have a like gender studies background with like literature, and like the way that I also I'm thinking of this right now is in terms of the way that there's almost this smokescreen created, in my opinion, like calling drag queens groomers or transgender people, or blaming the LGBTQ community for grooming when all you have to see is right in front of us in front of
Yeah.
our faces is it's almost never anyone from that community. It's, like you said, that everyday neighbor or the father who's like going to a sports event. Again, I'm not saying like everyone who's doing this, but like the guy next door, that all American guy. And like, why do you think that there is always this like boogeyman created, like almost using language? I mean, we see it from,
Hmm.
you know, the current administration that they almost keep using other communities to just create this smokescreen. Like, why do you think marginalized communities are brought in, like, and
Well, they're
pathologically,
scapegoats.
yeah, are used as
Yeah.
scapegoats?
Yeah, no, they are. They are. I mean, it's of course, it's human nature to look for an other to blame. It's human nature to say this isn't happening in my community, or it's not happening by people who look like me, or who act like me. People in my church wouldn't do this. People in my cultural group wouldn't do this. So that's why. I mean, the to categorize a homosexual person or a trans person as a groomer by definition is outrageous. I mean, and here's the thing. Of course, there can be and there is grooming that goes on in gay communities. I mean, I know, I have dozens of gay male friends who will say, "Hey, man, we had a lot to worry about from predators in our own community." When I'm 18, I get off the bus in some city. I appear and I want to be. I'm coming out as LGBTQ. I'm in this new town. There were all sorts of guys who would come in and meant to do me harm, not gay bashing harm, but you get the point. So grooming can occur in any community, but the idea that an individual who identifies as LGBTQ or identifies as trans, the idea that that person should be demonized or is evil because of how they view love is no, that's absolutely outrageous. But it doesn't surprise me. And by the way, if we if we lost those distinctions as human beings just the way we are, we would find a way to find others. If we didn't have religion, if we didn't have race, if we didn't have short and tall, if we both looked exactly, or if we all looked exactly the same, I still think there would be a way for us, unfortunately, to try to create winners and losers and good people and bad people and demonize certain populations. The truth about those marginalized communities is that they are victimized in almost absurd amounts. LGBTQ kids, trans kids, people in those marginalized communities. The truth is that they suffer victimization far, far, far more often than they perpetrate it. Again, the exception can be within small communities where, yeah, you've got an exploitive person who's in this X community who is looked because he has access and because, that kind of thing can happen. But across the board, it's usually not that way. Like you said, I mean, we're not seeing trans people in the Epstein files. I'm not aware of people who are out as homosexuals or anything like that in the Epstein files. We're seeing, incredibly wealthy, almost always white males, who are at the very, very, very top of the institutions that they represent.
Yeah. Well, as we're nearing the end, which again, thank you for your time, Roger. I mean, I want to have you back on definitely when you have like a new book coming out too. We'll talk
Sure.
about it.
I'm shopping one, so hopefully, fingers
Yeah.
crossed. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Well, a question though I do have is about boys and young men, which is, do you think that the justice system or that boys and young men are being listened to or encouraged to speak out more? Do you think there's still a ways to go? Because like I even remember with the Larry Nasser case, or I mean, we could go back to Jim Jones because he was abusing all different genders, all ages. I mean, Jim Jones is just, yeah, a wild case. But like, do you think that boys and young men are being listened to when they do come forward?
More than they were. I mean, there's still a lot of work to be done. Boys still underreport relative to girls. Uh, Traditional views of masculinity prevent boys from reporting. Traditional views of masculinity, what some people call toxic masculinity, but it doesn't even have to be toxic. It's just traditional masculine role. Boys should be able to protect themselves. Boys, if a boy suffers sexual abuse, does it quote unquote turn him into a gay person? Which that used, thankfully, that kind of stigma is thankfully that is lessening quite a bit. When I was a kid, I'm a lot older than you, but when I was I was growing up in the 70s and 80s. For most boys, the idea of being thought of as gay or being gay was very frightening to them, not necessarily because they were homophobes, but just because that was a difficult life. You're going to get laughed at, you're going to get picked on, you're going to be compared to a girl, you're going to be seen as feminine, and those things in a male dominated world and under a traditional masculine rubric are unacceptable. I don't want to be a part of that. So that is getting much better, much better. I am really heartened to see, growing up around, my friends have kids now, and just young people that I taught for a while or whatever. I see a much better thing, a much better dynamic going on now, but we still have a long way to go. Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, and how about even with, say, I mean, I know there was The Invisible War. I remember watching that as an undergrad. It's like a documentary about abuse in the military. But like, do you feel that there's a ways to go with, say, the military and even the prison system and abuse that goes on in those
absolutely.
systems?
I worked for the Army for 3 years, and I was embedded in the JAG Corps, and I was tasked with helping to change the culture, with helping JAGs prosecute these cases, but also with providing all sorts of recommendations. And I was there for about 2.5 years. I left honorably, but I had a very difficult experience there. I met wonderful people in the Army, but I also encountered quite a bit of resistance to what I felt they needed to do. Yeah, the military has a tremendous problem, and it's not because the military is bad. It's because predatory people look to infiltrate institutions, and they almost always look to infiltrate institutions that are good. The military is a respected thing. It defends our freedom. It builds character, provides it provides jobs, and it does all these good things. So from time to time, a predatory person is going to seek to infiltrate it and turn all those values on their basically on their head. And that's and again, the military is not unique. Every single institution out there faces this problem, so it's a challenge. Corrections is a different thing, but the dynamics are similar. I mean, we see a tremendous amount of sexual and physical abuse in prison, and I served on a prison rape elimination act committee for a while many years ago, and I feel very strongly about that. I don't care what a person has done. Nobody should be. Legal punishment is the only thing that should ever be meted out. And unfortunately, I think the biggest challenge in the prison system is mostly an unsympathetic population. Who cares to these guys? Who cares? Okay, a guy who commits burglary, yeah, we should probably protect him. But a guy who commits sexual abuse on somebody, it's poetic justice. That. So we need to get past that, because that's not legal, and it's just immoral. With the military, they have made great strides, and I believe to the core of the institution, I think they want to do the right thing, but they have to face the fact, like everybody else, that it's an institution. Predators are going to seek to infiltrate it, and the military needs and values traits that are sometimes associated with bad things. Violence and aggression are prized. Now, before I step on myself, for hundreds of years and the whole time of the United States, the military understands that, and that's why it talks about honor and discipline. Yes, you will need to show aggression. You will need to be murderous at times. You will need to kill on command to protect yourself and your country, but you will do it in that framework, and this is how we will teach you how to do that. So there's good intent there, and I think it often translates to good things. I think there are many military people who understand the blah. But again, from time to time, you're going to say, well, we need this guy. We don't like how he acts, but he gets the job done, and that's the challenge.
Yeah, I had a friend on here. The episode's still out. Her name is Helena Darwin, and she was so brave. She came forward about her advisor where I went to get my PhD. She was getting her PhD, and his whole claim to fame is that he was a male feminist, and then at the same time, he's grooming her and basically doing quid pro quo type predatory behavior. And again, it's just very interesting, like you said, that those who kind of fit a certain profile, they're enigmatic. They try to really gain praise. Sometimes they, create a smokescreen like they're the best feminist ever, and then
Mhm.
like at the same time are um doing this grooming behavior. But again, not all male feminists are right. I think that's the thing,
No,
is
no,
like
no.
to
But you're right.
parse out
It's
all of this.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And you're right. Again, people predatory people who seek to infiltrate institutions are usually going to pick ones that are respected and beloved, and they're going to use that tactic. I am the perfect X, fill in the blank. I am perfect for what it is that you're doing. I believe in your cause. Meanwhile, they're entirely selfish. They laugh at those values. They're looking to turn them on their head, and they're looking to exploit the individuals inside. And it's just every institution just has to be constantly on guard, because that kind of stuff it's out there. And we have to check each other. I mean, there these internal things, bringing in outside help to take a look at what your rules and regulations are. Every institution needs assistance at monitoring itself to prevent predatory people from getting in or from staying in.
Yeah, well, and I think when we see all of these emails with the Epstein files, it's the bystanders who are, I'm not saying they're as complicit, but they are complicit in the sense of like laughing along with these jokes about underage girls. I mean, it even reminds me
Sure.
when the, grab grab the women, uh by the P word came out, and you had like
Yeah,
that
yeah.
Hollywood Reporter laughing along. It's like
Oh,
that's the
absolutely.
thing, is the bystanders, like you said, to be vocal and say, hey, that's not right. Like to stop
Yeah.
it in its tracks. But I think it's a type of peer pressure that
Yeah, and
happens.
bystander intervention has actually proven successful. I have an old friend who was a victim advocate for a long time, and she had a lot of success with bystander intervention, basically empowering boys and men to, as males, as the person that's usually the perpetrator, empowering them to do exactly that. The absence of that is rape culture. Rape culture, again, probably for another conversation, but
Yeah.
I have many feminist friends who have told me what rape culture is, have explained it to me, and I get it. And the absence of that bystander engagement, the absence of a man, when somebody makes a statement, and I'm sorry, but Trump did, that was an outrageous and despicable thing to say. To laugh at it is to encourage rape culture. To stop and say respectfully, that's a really terrible thing to say. That moves us in a better direction.
Yeah, yeah,
But
yeah,
rape culture is the thing. I mean,
yeah.
we still live under a society where so many of our norms and institutions end up leading to that kind of exploitation and abuse.
Yeah, this is why I love. Do you know the writer Jessica Valenti?
Yes, I do.
Yeah,
I
okay.
don't know her personally, but I read quite a bit of her
Yeah,
stuff. I
no, her
admire her
work
very
is
much. Yeah.
fascinating. But yeah,
Hmm.
all of those kinds of
Yep.
um, analyses. But well, that's what I wanted to end with is Roger, I know these are so deep, like these are, such important conversations, but hard conversations, depressing conversations, because I say depressing because I'm sure you hear, right? Currently, well, what can we do? Right? Like it feels like that's how I feel with a lot of news right now. It's like, okay, I'm angry. Like I'm
Hmm.
outraged. Okay, how do we funnel that energy into actual action? Like, what's your advice for resources or things like, people hear this, they want to be better bystanders. They want to speak up. Like, what do you suggest in terms of resources out there?
I mean, there are wonderful resources out there. End Violence Against Women International, EVA, is an organization. I served as president for a few years. I think they're, just, I'm saying that just to not to seem to pitch something that I was a part of, but I love the organization. I think it's responsible and wonderful, and it has tremendous resources for survivors and responders. So I think that's a good one. Jane Doe No More is an organization. Put it this way: if for your viewers, my website, rogercanaff.com, contains a lot of these resources. It's certainly not an exhaustive list, but if you are, if a person out there wants to get involved or needs help, you know, RAIN is another good one. RRAIN. There are plenty of places to go online to look and to become involved. But that's generally what I suggest. But if I can assist, I'm very easy to reach. I'm not a hard guy to track down. If there's anybody that I can speak to or point in the right direction, whether it's therapeutic or an actual case or whatever, I'm happy to do that.
Yeah, no, thank you. Yeah, everyone go to, Roger's website where you'll see, his nonfiction writing, his fiction writing, his advocacy that he's talked about here. Is there any social media that you would suggest people follow too?
Again, those organizations that I mentioned are really terrific. There's an organization called Male Survivor, which is particular to the experiences of boys. I think that there are good people. You always have to be careful online, just because online is online. But absolutely, those resources are out there. And again, if I can assist, I vet everything that goes on my website. I'm very careful about it, and I keep up with it. So I'm happy to help, and I can point anybody in directions that I think are valid also.
No, thank you so much. This was necessary. I mean, my mind has just been, as everyone in the American public, just spinning around with the Epstein files and, banging my head against the wall because I want these predators to be held accountable at the end of the day. Which, we'll see what, but like you said, it gives me a lot of hope that the American public can affect change from the ground up. It just takes a seismic wave to really.
Yeah, I mean, to put it in Gladwell terms, it's a tipping point. It does happen. It does happen. We do move forward. To quote Dr. King, the arc of history is long. I still believe it bends toward justice. It can happen, and I think it is happening. We're seeing a groundswell. But it's scary because the individuals who are threatened are so powerful that you wonder what havoc they may wreak on the world, before they're taken down. So
yeah.
One more thing to worry about.
Yeah. Oh, and one thing I did want to ask your opinion is, because of, even in your thriller writing, like with all of these distressing themes that you're part of, any advice for like those out there, I mean, myself included, like, we want to be present, we want to advocate. How do you at the same time shut off that brain and enjoy life? Like, how can you balance both sides of doing all of this?
I would say that, self-care is very important. Another organization that I've worked with for a long time is called Innocent Justice. And I think it's innocentjustice.org. It's a old friend of mine, Beth Hammond, who runs it. They're marvelous. And they go around and they talk to, specifically, they talk to responders. They talk to detectives, people who do internet crimes against children, so-called ICAC. People who have to consume child pornography. But not only that, they also, they provide advice for self-care for everyone who has to consume this stuff. And I think, I absolutely believe this. As a society, we are going to need to practice self-care in a way that we really haven't before. And other things have happened. When the Catholic Church crisis broke about 35 years ago, there were millions, not just American Catholics or around the world, but there were millions and millions of people who had to grieve that, who had to take it in and face these things about an institution that they otherwise respect and love. We are going through a similar thing, perhaps, and maybe even on a larger scale. But yeah, I agree. Self-care is important. Doing other things, tuning out, limiting your time on social media, actually having a timer. Again, I'm not a therapeutic expert, but I have good resources out there for people who are looking for that, and stuff that's helped me. Whether it's box breathing or taking a walk or whatever, because we are absolutely in it.
I agree. Jonathan Haidt's The Anxious Generation is like a book I just keep recommending because, we need to like, I can feel when social media is starting to create anxiety spirals in my mind. So I can't even imagine if you had to consume, child pornography. Like I can't even imagine what that does to your psyche.
It changes you. It harms it is the bottom line. I mean, again, it's, people are resilient, but yeah, it changes a person. It absolutely does. And those kinds of self-care techniques. But again, not just for people who have to consume that, but for anybody right now. I mean, my wife is she is a generally happy, really upbeat, positive person. She's mad as hell right now. I mean, not in a negative way, not to the extent that just, she's a great wife, a good friend, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
But, she is more upset and more concerned about this than she has been, about a lot of things for a long, long time. And I think there are millions of people just like her who are going through this.
Yeah.
Cross-culturally.
Yeah. Well, Roger, thank you for your time. I definitely hope to have you back on. You're definitely the Ivory Tower Boiler Room's legal expert when it comes to special victims.
I've really enjoyed the conversation. If I can add value, please, I'd be happy to come back.
Yeah, thank you. Well, and everyone out there, make sure you follow and look at Roger's work on his website, which is in the show notes. And until next time, bye, Roger.
All right.